Welcome back to Message. If you've ever wondered why avoidants pull away from the very people they care about most, today's video will reveal the hidden psychology behind emotional safety, trust, and the kind of connection that truly allows an avoidant to fall deeply in love. What if the biggest mistake people make with avoidance is trying to love them harder? The truth is, the more pressure an avoidant feels, the more likely they are to pull away. Today, you'll discover what actually makes an avoidant feel safe enough to stay and genuinely fall in love. If you've ever loved someone with avoidant tendencies, you know how confusing the relationship can feel. One moment they seem warm, affectionate, and emotionally connected. The next, they become distant, quiet, or emotionally unavailable, leaving you wondering what changed. The more you try to bring them closer, the more they seem to pull away. The reason this happens is that avoidant individuals often experience closeness differently than people with secure or anxious attachment styles. Emotional intensity rarely makes them feel safer. Constant reassurance, repeated conversations about the relationship, or chasing them for connection usually has the opposite effect. Instead of feeling loved, they often feel overwhelmed, causing them to create even more distance. Many people believe the answer is to love an avoidant harder, give more attention, or fight for the relationship with greater emotional effort. But what truly allows an avoidant to develop deep love isn't emotional intensity, it's emotional safety. That doesn't mean becoming cold or pretending not to care. It means creating a relationship where closeness feels calm rather than overwhelming, where they don't feel trapped, controlled, or responsible for managing another person's emotional world. One of the biggest misunderstandings is believing intimacy grows through emotional pressure. Repeated reassurance, constant discussions, and urgent attempts to fix the relationship often feel emotionally heavy to an avoidant nervous system. As that pressure increases, so does their desire to withdraw and regulate themselves through distance. Everything begins to change when emotions are expressed without cornering them. You can be honest about your feelings without demanding immediate comfort or validation. You can communicate your needs without expecting them to instantly solve your emotional discomfort. Your feelings remain genuine, but they're expressed from a place of confidence rather than fear. For many avoidants, this is unfamiliar. They're often used to relationships where distance leads to criticism, guilt, blame, or emotional chasing. They expect conflict whenever they need space. But when you remain emotionally grounded, instead of reacting impulsively, their nervous system slowly begins to relax. Their defenses become less necessary because closeness no longer feels emotionally dangerous. This doesn't mean ignoring your own needs or pretending everything is fine. It means being intentional with your communication. Timing, tone, and emotional energy matter. There's a significant difference between calmly expressing hurt and reacting from panic. One creates resistance, while the other builds trust. And trust is what allows an avoidant to gradually move closer. As they begin associating you with peace instead of pressure, the relationship naturally shifts. They stop feeling as though they constantly have to defend themselves or meet impossible emotional expectations. Without being forced, they begin opening up more, reaching out more often, and staying emotionally connected for longer because the relationship starts feeling safe instead of overwhelming. This is how deep love develops for someone with avoidant patterns, not through emotional intensity, but through emotional security. Not through demands, but through steady consistency. Not through pressure, but through an environment where they can breathe. Another quality that deeply changes these relationships is genuine independence. Not pretending to be independent to make them jealous, but truly living a fulfilling life whether they're close or distant. Avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional dependence. The moment they feel responsible for someone else's identity, happiness, or emotional stability, their instinct is often to create distance because it threatens their sense of freedom. Real independence removes that fear. You continue investing in your goals, friendships, passions, and personal growth regardless of what's happening in the relationship. You don't lose yourself every time they need space. Your life remains balanced, purposeful, and emotionally stable. That quiet confidence naturally earns an avoidant's respect. Since they deeply value autonomy, they're often drawn toward people who are emotionally secure and self-sufficient. They begin seeing you as someone who chooses the relationship rather than someone who depends on it to feel complete. That difference is far more attractive than many people realize. Ironically, authentic independence often creates more attraction instead of distance. When your life no longer revolves around them, they become naturally curious about where they fit in your world. Because your space comes from authenticity rather than manipulation, it lowers their defensiveness and encourages them to invest on their own. They reach out more naturally, stay engaged longer, and participate in the relationship because they genuinely want to, not because they feel obligated. This creates something every avoidant quietly longs for: balance. No chasing, no emotional suffocation, no endless cycle of pursuit and withdrawal. Just two emotionally healthy people choosing each other freely. In that kind of relationship, they no longer fear losing themselves by becoming close. Perhaps the most attractive quality of all is emotional confidence. When you're secure within yourself, you stop forcing outcomes, overthinking every change in their behavior, or constantly trying to earn love. You simply show up with honesty, consistency, and calm. That steady presence becomes incredibly attractive because it allows love to grow naturally instead of under pressure. When an avoidant feels both freedom and safety, connection stops feeling like something they need to escape. It slowly becomes the place they genuinely want to return to. That's also why emotional unpredictability often pushes them away. Sudden mood swings, impulsive messages, emotional ultimatums, or intense reactions to small situations can activate their instinct to withdraw. Calm consistency, however, creates the exact opposite response. It gives them the safety they need to stay emotionally present. What helps an avoidant stay emotionally connected is a sense of stability. That stability doesn't come from hiding your emotions or pretending everything is fine. It doesn't mean becoming distant, silent, or emotionally unavailable. It simply means your emotional state isn't constantly controlled by their behavior. You don't go from feeling secure to panicked because they took longer to reply. You don't let every shift in their mood determine your own. Instead, you stay calm, self-aware, and emotionally balanced even when things feel uncertain. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that kind of consistency is incredibly uncommon. Many of them grew up in environments where emotions felt unpredictable, overwhelming, or unsafe. Their nervous system learned to associate closeness with stress, criticism, or emotional pressure. So when they meet someone who can express disappointment without attacking, communicate needs without demanding, and remain calm during difficult moments, it quietly changes what they believe relationships can be. They begin to see that intimacy doesn't have to be filled with conflict or emotional chaos. That realization often affects them much more deeply than grand romantic gestures ever could. Choosing calm communication instead of emotional reactions shows genuine maturity. Think about a situation where they become distant or take a little longer to respond. It's easy to assume the worst, confront them immediately, or seek reassurance. But responding from a grounded place creates a completely different experience. You allow space without immediately falling into fear or trying to regain control. That quiet confidence says something powerful without needing many words. It shows that you trust yourself and that you aren't trying to force the relationship to ease your anxiety. Over time, your emotional consistency becomes comforting to them. They begin connecting your presence with peace instead of pressure. You become someone who doesn't create emotional storms whenever the relationship changes pace. You don't expect them to constantly manage your emotions, and that feels incredibly safe. This is often where love begins to deepen in a natural way. They stay engaged in conversations longer. They become more willing to share parts of themselves. They reach out more often because emotional closeness no longer feels threatening. Calm consistency creates an atmosphere where intimacy can exist without activating their fear of being overwhelmed. For many avoidants, creating distance has always been their way of coping. Whenever emotions become too intense, stepping back helps them feel in control again. Most people respond by chasing harder, demanding answers, or withdrawing in return. But when you remain steady instead of reacting impulsively, you interrupt that familiar cycle. You show them that closeness doesn't automatically come with emotional pressure. Some people respond to avoidant behavior by becoming cold themselves. Others use silence, guilt, or passive-aggressive behavior to make the avoidant feel responsible. While those reactions are understandable, they often reinforce the avoidant's deepest fears about relationships. They confirm the belief that intimacy eventually becomes controlling or emotionally exhausting. Pressure creates resistance, while punishment creates more distance. Calmly allowing space creates something entirely different. It sends a quiet message. I'm okay, and I respect your need for space without abandoning myself. There is no manipulation, no emotional game, and no desperate pursuit. You're simply remaining emotionally grounded. Ironically, this changes everything. Distance usually gives an avoidant relief because they're escaping emotional intensity. But when there is no conflict waiting for them, no guilt, and no emotional explosion, distance loses much of its purpose. Instead of feeling relieved, they gradually begin missing the calm they experienced with you. Not because you intentionally made yourself unavailable, but because your presence felt peaceful rather than demanding. As they realize they can take space without being criticized or punished, their internal defenses slowly begin relaxing. They often return more naturally, communicate more willingly, and feel less need to escape because the relationship no longer feels emotionally threatening. Eventually, the entire dynamic shifts. Space stops feeling like survival, and closeness starts feeling like a choice. That sense of choice is incredibly important to someone with avoidant patterns because choice creates safety. When you stop chasing them during periods of distance and stop treating their need for space as rejection, they no longer associate you with fear. As fear fades, genuine emotional connection has room to grow. Healthy boundaries also play a much bigger role than many people realize. Some believe boundaries make avoidants feel trapped, but the opposite is often true. Clear, respectful boundaries usually make them feel safer. What often overwhelms them is being with someone who has no emotional limits, no personal standards, and no life outside the relationship. That creates unspoken pressure because they begin feeling responsible for someone else's emotional stability. Healthy boundaries remove that burden. They communicate self-respect without control. They show that you value your own time, emotional well-being, and identity. An avoidant notices that you're not abandoning yourself to keep the relationship alive, and that creates trust. You're not asking them to change who they are. You're simply being honest about what works for you while respecting yourself in the process. That kind of confidence creates emotional stability, and stability feels deeply attractive to someone with avoidant tendencies. Healthy boundaries aren't walls or ultimatums. They aren't about controlling another person. They're calm, consistent expressions of self-respect. Instead of demanding constant communication or reacting emotionally every time their behavior changes, you might simply say, I value consistency. If communication becomes very unpredictable, I'll naturally spend more time focusing on my own life and priorities. There's no blame, no guilt, and no attempt to punish them. It's simply an honest expression of your needs, delivered with confidence, clarity, and respect. When your boundaries stay calm and consistent, an avoidant is far less likely to feel trapped or pressured by them. Many people with avoidant patterns will quietly test limits, not necessarily to hurt you, but because they've often experienced relationships where people abandon their own standards just to keep the connection alive. They're used to seeing boundaries disappear when fear of losing the relationship takes over. But when you hold your boundaries without anger, lengthy explanations, or emotional outbursts, something important begins to happen. They start respecting you. And for many avoidants, respect is one of the strongest foundations for lasting love. Without it, closeness feels unstable. With it, emotional connection becomes calmer, safer, and more genuine. Healthy boundaries also remove the unspoken expectation that you'll endlessly accept inconsistency while sacrificing your own emotional well-being. Instead of constantly chasing reassurance or demanding clarity, you protect your own peace. That leaves the avoidant with the freedom to decide whether they genuinely want to meet you emotionally. Because the decision becomes theirs, it doesn't trigger their fear of being controlled. Over time, your consistency quietly teaches them how to relate to you. They naturally learn which behaviors strengthen the relationship and which create distance. Not because you're punishing them, but because you're honoring yourself. That quiet self-respect changes how they see you. Instead of feeling responsible for carrying your emotional world, they begin admiring your emotional strength. And admiration creates space where deeper love can grow naturally. Another pattern that often overwhelms avoidance is overgiving. Kindness isn't the problem. The problem is that excessive giving often carries silent expectations, even if they're never spoken aloud. Sometimes giving too much unintentionally communicates a need for reassurance, commitment, constant attention, or emotional validation. Avoidants are highly sensitive to those unspoken pressures. Balanced emotional openness is much more attractive to them. You can be caring without losing yourself. You can show affection without overwhelming them. You can express love without constantly trying to earn it through sacrifice. That creates a relationship that feels emotionally lighter instead of emotionally demanding. Overgiving often shows up in subtle ways, always being available, offering endless reassurance, ignoring your own needs to avoid conflict, constantly putting their comfort ahead of your own. Even when those actions come from genuine love, they slowly shift the emotional balance. Eventually, the avoidant begins feeling responsible for your happiness, even if you've never asked them to be. That sense of responsibility often activates their need to pull away. Healthy emotional balance removes that pressure. Instead of overcompensating, you allow them the opportunity to move toward you naturally. You don't become distant or emotionally unavailable. You simply create room for both people to invest equally. Sometimes you let them initiate conversations. Sometimes you allow them to express affection first. As they begin choosing closeness on their own, the relationship feels authentic rather than forced. That voluntary connection matters deeply to an avoidant because chosen intimacy feels safe. Forced intimacy does not. This balance also changes the way you express yourself. You no longer feel the need to over-explain every emotion, defend every feeling, or convince them to understand your perspective. You communicate honestly, respectfully, and clearly, then allow the relationship to unfold naturally. You trust that real connection grows through mutual understanding, not emotional pressure. That quiet confidence is incredibly attractive because it reflects emotional independence. You're emotionally available without becoming emotionally dependent. You care deeply without abandoning your own needs. You stay present without trying to control the outcome. As time passes, they begin experiencing you differently. You become someone who is warm without being overwhelming, open without being demanding, loving without losing yourself in the process. That combination is rare for many avoidants. It allows them to stay emotionally engaged without feeling like they'll lose their own identity. This is where love often begins deepening in a quiet, lasting way. Not through dramatic emotions or constant intensity, but through balance. When you remain emotionally open without overextending yourself, you invite them to meet you halfway instead of carrying the relationship alone. And when they choose to do that willingly, the connection feels mutual, peaceful, and emotionally safe. At the heart of everything is one simple truth. Love with an avoidant doesn't grow through chasing, pressure, or emotional intensity. It grows through safety, self-respect, consistency, and emotional balance. The moment you stop trying to pull love out of them and instead become someone whose presence feels peaceful, the relationship naturally begins to shift. Avoidants don't usually move closer because they're pushed into intimacy. They move closer because being with you starts feeling safer than withdrawing from you. Every healthy principle supports that change. Emotional safety reduces fear. Independence removes pressure. Consistency builds trust. Respecting space without punishment lowers defensiveness. Healthy boundaries create respect. Balanced emotional availability encourages genuine attraction. None of these are manipulation techniques or relationship games. They're simply the result of emotional maturity and inner stability. They come from focusing on becoming emotionally grounded rather than trying to control someone else's emotions. Perhaps the most important shift is this. Eventually, your question stops being, how do I make this avoidant love me? Instead, it becomes, am I creating the kind of relationship where healthy love can exist? Whether they step into that connection or not, your self-worth no longer depends on the answer. You stop minimizing your own needs. You stop overgiving just to keep someone close. You stop waiting for someone else's choice before valuing yourself. Ironically, that's often when avoidants begin choosing the relationship more fully, because it finally feels equal, safe, and free. And that's the kind of love that lasts, not only with avoidants, but with anyone who is emotionally ready for a healthy relationship. In the end, loving an avoidant isn't about trying harder, proving your value, or forcing emotional closeness. Real intimacy grows where there is trust, balance, freedom, and emotional safety. The more grounded, confident, and self-respecting you become, the more room there is for authentic love to grow naturally. And when love is built on security instead of fear, both people are free to choose it every single day. You can't force an avoidant to open their heart, but you can create the kind of connection where love feels safe instead of overwhelming. Stay grounded, respect yourself, and let genuine connection grow naturally. If this video helped you, subscribe to, like, and share it with someone who needs to understand avoidant attachment more deeply.